we need to step back and understand larger strategic interests, at least interests that may or may not be real for the American people, but are being driven in Washington by interests. The largest, most powerful scientific industrial state in terms of output, production, growth, all of those matters by any measure in Europe and in much of the world, frankly, certainly it's in the top 3 or 4, is Germany. Historically, there has been peace in Europe and cooperation whenever Moscow and Berlin have cooperated. And that goes back over 300 years. And I think the Anglo-Saxon powers, Great Britain, primarily the British Empire, and then the United States, and now both Washington and London, have decided that whatever happens in the future, that level of cooperation and collaboration should never happen again. And so there is this underlying notion, not just that the Germans were benefiting from cheap natural gas in their manufacturing and industrial facilities, because they were. Right now, the German chemical industry, which is a leader in the world, optics, leader in the world, some of your more advanced medicines, leaders in the world. We haven't even gotten into steel and other areas of technology and engineering that the Germans lead in. All of those things are shutting down. Tens of thousands of Germans are out of work. So in addition to being unable to heat your home, you're no longer able to make a living, and the economy itself is being destroyed. Now, when this became clear to even someone as disappointing and unimaginative as Olaf Scholz, the accountant who became prime minister, he decided that it was time for secret talks with Moscow to find a way out of this, because he recognized that Germany was in serious, serious trouble economically and, most important, socially. Go back to what I was discussing earlier. You know, all the problems in a society that are suppressed and held in check by various forces suddenly come to the surface when the state turns out to be feckless and incapable. That's happening in Germany. So they're talking about social unrest on a scale no one has seen since 1929, 30, and 31. Unsurprisingly, we found out about these talks. And there is a theory, and I cannot prove it, and I have no facts to support it other than my knowledge of these talks and interests, that we decided to act, whether we did it or the United Kingdom's Royal Navy did it, or the Poles did it with assistance from the Royal Navy or from us. I have no idea. But suddenly we had this detonation and put this pipeline out of business, which essentially foreclosed German options and said, whether you like it or not, Germany, you are a vassal state of the greater American empire. You will do as you are told. You will stand fast and hold the line as we pursue this fight with Russia. Now, here's a piece of news I just received, and I don't know if this is right or not, but I received a tweet from Germany this morning indicating that someone in the German government, I don't know who it was, has said that the Nord Stream pipeline that was damaged can be repaired. And if that's true, I'm sure the Danes, the Germans, Dutch, and others will all be interested in repairing it. The other little piece of information that Americans are not aware of is that very suddenly, within 24 hours of the destruction of Nord Stream 2, you had in Poland a pipeline that had been built between Norway and Poland to carry natural gas suddenly begin to operate and provide, by the way, much more expensive natural gas than the Russians to the Poles. And at the same time, the Poles, out of the blue, decided that they want trillions of dollars of reparations from the Germans. And this is decades after these issues were settled by Germany in the 1960s and 70s with all of the states that were injured by the German military during World War II. So it's very odd to see this strange convergence of various activities right in the aftermath of this Nord Stream 2 destruction. In any case, it's a disaster for Germany. It's a disaster for Central Europe. And this disaster is having an impact elsewhere. Things are very bad in the United Kingdom. And the Norwegians have already told the British that if they're short energy this winter, that Norway may not be able to help them. because Norway has its own needs as well as its paying customers elsewhere. What we're finding is that all of the European states that have lived together in relative peace and harmony for 50, 60, 70 years, they're not so harmonious. And they are out for themselves. And no one gives a damn if something is what they desperately need and someone else has it. So that's why I say I think this entire superstructure of the EU and NATO is likely to first fragment, splinter, and then either fall apart officially or just sit a collection of empty buildings in Belgium somewhere.
Well, what you're saying is very plausible, because if Russia and Germany are looking for an off-ramp, blowing up the pipeline takes away Russia's most compelling incentive to Germany, which is, resuming the supply of cheap natural gas. But in terms of your claim that there were secret talks between Germany and Russia toward this end, this is something you've heard from your own sources, or this has been reported?
No, I've read that in open source in German newspapers as well as here. You can find that in the media. It's very difficult, but you can dig it out. And I think it's entirely plausible. And remember, both Macron and Scholz were talking off and on to Putin. And I think that's another reason that Putin was not putting his foot on the gas with regard to military power, because he thought, well, perhaps Macron and Scholz are actually going to sober up. They're going to take the lead and we'll put an end to this conflict. Again, he was disappointed.
What is it that the United States and the West wants to achieve? Like we keep hearing talk of weakening Russia, making it so that they can't do something like this again. But I don't think that they're being motivated by humanitarian concerns. I don't think that they care about saving the lives of Ukrainians, or else they would be probably engaging in encouraging diplomacy and negotiations. Mm-hmm. So what are their actual motives? Why do they care about weakening Russia? Another easy question for you.
Dimitri Simes asked the same question on Monday. And you have to set aside rationality. Because once again, if you look at it from a purely strategic interest standpoint, we have no interest ultimately in who controls Eastern Ukraine. I mean, let's be frank. It doesn't make a great deal of difference to us. What we do have an interest in Eastern Europe, as well as in the rest of Europe, is avoiding a war. And that has been part of American national military strategy since Eisenhower was in office. Whatever happens, we must work hard to avoid a direct confrontation with the Soviet Union. And subsequently, after the collapse, even President Bush, said we no longer regard Russia as an enemy, but we have a permanent interest in peace in Europe. Well, of course we do, because at the end of the day, prosperity depends on order and peace. You can't have prosperity without it. And we have always been preeminently interested as a commercial power in prosperity. So logically, none of this makes any sense. So I have to set that aside.
Let me ask you about this news from OPEC, where they just announced that they're going to slash oil production by 2 million barrels per day. The fear now is that this will push up oil prices worldwide. And the Biden White House sees this both as obviously a big threat to their own political prospects in the midterm, but also helping Russia in the proxy war in Ukraine. This is just happening as we're speaking, so you might not have had the time to look at this news, but I'm wondering, just hearing this now, if you have any reaction to it and what this means for the proxy war going forward.
Well, I think it's very important because for a very long time, as we talked about earlier, people were tired of being bullied by the United States, not just with military power, but through the global financial system that we control and dominate. In other words, the dollar-based system of commerce and exchange. People have been looking for an alternative, but this financial system that we've built is both very effective. It's extremely beneficial to us. It's not easy to replace. And this serious effort to now replace it has begun. So you have many countries that are interested in quote unquote de-dollarizing, and that includes the Saudis. I think it's spreading to the Emirates. India certainly is part of that. So is China. Frankly, the Japanese are uncomfortable with it. And one of the things that's happening that nobody ever bothers to point out, which I find very strange, is that the Japanese and the Chinese are currently dumping their U.S. treasuries. that should be taken as a very serious matter, because the assumption is that people will always buy our debt, but that's no longer true. So the Fed has been buying up portions of our debt for a very long time. We're going to get to the point where no one wants to buy our debt. Then you're in trouble, because we can't finance ourselves. And since we have no manufacturing base, we don't build anything anymore or produce anything anymore other than some military equipment. How do we survive it? So I think all of these things are connected, and the Saudis have made it very clear that they are happy to do business with the Russians in rubles, with the Chinese in yuan. And remember, it was the petrodollar that succeeded the gold standard dollar that went out of business under Nixon. If the petrodollar goes under, what have we got left? Now, I'm not saying all of this happens immediately, but I think it's closer than we think. And I think we're going to see more and more alternatives to the current global financial system and its institutions emerge. And I think the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians in particular, the Brazilians, and many others around the world are cooperating right now to achieve that end. And that's something that should concern us. So I think it's a very dangerous set of circumstances emerging. I don't think we're in control anymore, Aaron. I don't think the Bush administration is in control at all.
Yeah.
And I think most Americans are figuring it out. So pretty soon, people are going to say, well, who's in charge? Who's in control? How does this happen?